overnight. The terror attack in London. The Border Patrol's manpower problem.
Will there be, bad apples that come through? There's always the possibility.
And motion capture Shakespeare. Barring a major compromise overnight, the Republican leadership doesn't have enough votes to get its Obamacare repeal bill through the House tomorrow. At least 25 members of the right-wing Freedom Caucus say they'll vote against the bill. The Trump administration can only afford to lose 22 GOP votes, assuming all Democrats vote no. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes reiterated today that there's no evidence to support President Trump's wiretapping allegations. But he did say that he now has evidence suggesting that information on Trump transition officials was collected as part of a broader legal surveillance effort.
What I saw has nothing to do with Russia and nothing to do with the Russia investigation, has everything to do with possible surveillance activities, and the president needs to know that these intelligence reports are out there.
Nunes' counterpart on the Intelligence Committee fired back.
The chairman will need to decide whether he is the chairman of an independent investigation or he is going to act as a surrogate of the White House.
The Brazilian government says meat exports have plunged 99.9% since last Friday. That's when police accused poultry and meat factories of bribing inspectors to approve the sale of rotten or tainted produce. The EU and several countries, including China and Mexico, have banned meat products from Brazil, the world's largest chicken and beef exporter. The site where Jesus' body is said to be buried reopened today after 9 months of restoration work. Disputes between several Christian denominations that jointly oversee the Church of the Holy Sepulchre had held up this restoration effort for 200 years. The last time they repaired the tomb was in the early 1800s. At least 4 people were killed and 40 injured in an attack outside the Houses of Parliament in London. Police are calling it a major terrorist incident, the first large-scale attack in the UK in more than a decade. Prime Minister Theresa May spoke to reporters on Wednesday evening.
The full details of exactly what happened are still emerging, but having been updated by police and security officials, I can confirm that this appalling incident began when a single attacker drove his vehicle into pedestrians walking across Westminster Bridge.
Ben Ferguson was at the scene of the attack shortly after it was secured.
Witnesses describe a grey 4x4 travelling at speed, mounting the pavement and deliberately hitting pedestrians, including a group of French schoolchildren, before crashing into the railings of the British Parliament building just below Big Ben.
As I was waiting that green light to change, the car speeded up and passed me that small shop after the traffic light. That's the first victim hit.
And then I heard a big sort of crunch. It sounded like a car crash, but then almost that crunch of a wheel on a curb. Then I saw the vehicle mount the curb, and it was coming out so quickly. I saw some people be hit in front of me.
So there was a woman pinned up against a wall?
Under the wheel of the car, yeah. The wheel, literally.
About 20 victims were left lying on the bridge. One woman was later pulled from the River Thames. Bystanders said the attacker was dressed entirely in black and armed with knives, and that he repeatedly stabbed a policeman trying to stop him from entering the Westminster Palace compound. The attacker then ran towards the entrance of the House of Commons, where he was shot by plainclothes officers. Police have not yet identified a suspect, and no group has claimed responsibility.
The London attack happened on the 1-year anniversary of 3 coordinated suicide bombings in Brussels that killed 32 people and injured 300. British authorities have not yet said if they believe the incidents are connected, but they're similar in style. There's been a gradual movement away from large-scale terror attacks against institutions and toward attacks on so-called soft targets, like pedestrians and concertgoers. The most infamous of those was the massacre at the Bataclan in Paris, orchestrated by a cell of ISIS fighters who were born and raised in Europe. Many of the terrorists behind those attacks, including the masterminds, were from Molenbeek, a poor and mostly Muslim neighborhood of the Belgian capital. Seb Walker visited Molenbeek to see how things have changed a year later.
In the heart of the Brussels neighborhood that became synonymous with ISIS, coach Karim Tabakalt is overseeing evening practice.
Tell us a little bit about the club. What does it mean to this community?
Le but principal, c'est que les enfants ne soient pas dans la rue, qu'ils peuvent, comme je vous disais tout à l'heure, faire une activité sportive.
This is FC Jeunesse Molenbeek, the main sports club in the neighborhood where several of the Brussels attackers were based. A year later, the players here are still dealing with the backlash.
Oui, donc je disais, depuis que le nom Molenbeek a été associé au terrorisme, aux attentats, ce qu'il y a eu, il y a une stigmatisation de la commune, des gens de la commune, des gens qui habitaient à la commune forcément.
On March 22nd, Brussels was hit by 3 coordinated suicide blasts, 2 of them at the city's main airport. 35 people were killed. A nation was in shock. A year later, security forces here are still on one of their highest levels of alert. There are hundreds of soldiers on the streets at any given time. Molenbeek in particular has seen increased police raids and surveillance as Belgian authorities try to prevent further attacks. This neighborhood alone has seen more than 100 young men leave to fight in Syria over the past few years. In fact, Belgium exports more ISIS fighters per capita than any European country.
Il aimait bien le foot. Samy était un petit garçon très calme, content, sauf que c'était un enfant qui était tiraillé entre la couleur de la peau de son père et la couleur de la peau de sa mère.
Veronique Lout's son, Samy, was one of the very first to leave for Syria. A convert to Islam since the age of 15, Samy had given his parents no indication he was thinking of joining ISIS. But one day, in 2012, after Veronique went to visit a relative, Samy was gone by the time she got back.
Et ça a été fini, je ne l'ai plus jamais revu. Parce que le lendemain, il partait, lui, vers la Syrie. Mais il m'a rien dit, pas un mot.
They stayed in touch over Skype, but Samy refused to tell his mother where he was.
Et puis en 2015, un jour, il m'a dit, maintenant je ne peux plus parler parce qu'il y a des drones qui passent au-dessus de chez moi. Plus jamais je n'ai entendu mon fils.
Samy was killed by a drone strike in Syria in 2016. He's accused of helping to plan the Paris attacks earlier that year. But while the numbers of young Belgian Muslims leaving for Syria has dropped, authorities say radicalization is still happening. In Molenbeek, it's Olivier van der Hagen's job to try to stop it. Olivier is one of a network of de-radicalization officers set up in the aftermath of the attacks. He's not a Muslim or a policeman. He's a trained anthropologist.
So what does a de-radicalization officer do?
On analyse toujours ce qui s'est passé au sein de la famille, parce qu'au sein de la famille, il y a souvent un conflit ou bien une rupture amoureuse ou un décès qui peut expliquer que le jeune, à un moment donné, aille chercher des réponses à l'extérieur de sa famille. Les parents nous informent parce que le jeune commence à quitter la maison, il commence à remettre en cause les pratiques au sein de la famille. Il stigmatise les parents comme n'ayant pas inculqué le bon islam. Des jeunes qui demandent un passeport pour la Syrie, par exemple.
Olivier says heightened surveillance has made it easier to catch people leaving for Syria. But the recruiters are now radicalizing youths for attacks at home. As to why it's been such a problem in Molenbeek, where youth unemployment is around 50%, Olivier says it's not as simple as you'd think.
Par contre, je peux vous dire que ce n'est pas une question socio-économique. Tous les jeunes qui sont dans une situation de précarité socio-économique ne se radicalisent pas. C'est plutôt une question d'identité. Donc, à un moment donné, ils ne se sentaient pas assez reconnus par la société et qui ont décidé de régler leur compte avec la société.
For the players of FC Jeunesse Molenbeek, it's hard to escape the stigma of growing up as a young Muslim male in this neighborhood. 17-year-old Walid Goulam coaches young kids and hopes to turn professional one day. But he says many of his friends have been arrested, and he's worried it could happen to him too.
Après les attentats, il y a eu des soucis avec la police. La violence de la police, elle a augmenté envers les jeunes. Tout le monde peut faire des perquisitions, rien trouver. Hein. C'est normal. Les gens, ils viennent chez toi, ils te disent terroriste. Tu viens d'où? Tu viens de Molenbeek. Tout le monde voit le quartier Molenbeek différent.
Today, the U.S. hosted an international consortium of 67 partners, including France, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, to try to craft a long-term plan of attack against ISIS. It'll have to be a two-track strategy. Within 6 months of announcing a caliphate in 2014, ISIS had gained control of about 34,000 square miles of territory in Iraq and Syria. Since then, offensives by Syrian, Iraqi, and Kurdish fighters, with air support from the US and Russia, have pushed ISIS out of at least a quarter of its land in Iraq and nearly half in Syria. But despite those losses, ISIS and its global affiliates have directly conducted more than 100 attacks worldwide since 2014. And that's what makes it so hard to combat. Even when it's low on territory, ISIS is never short on online influence. Dramatic videos of beheadings and a powerful social media grooming strategy have inspired attacks across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. The challenge for the coalition is to find a way to fight an enemy that's both a physical group and an ideology, which may be why today's meeting was hosted not by the Pentagon, but by the State Department. Josh Hirsch has more from Washington.
For the past 2 years, Donald Trump has been promising that he has a secret strategy to defeat the Islamic State, what he once called a foolproof way of winning the war against ISIS. Since becoming president, he's had a budget that's emphasized hard power and military might over diplomacy. Today, reality started creeping back in. The plan to defeat ISIS, as today's event at the State Department made clear, is really broadly just Obama's plan. And it's one that even Secretary of State Rex Tillerson acknowledged relies heavily on teamwork and allies to do things that the Americans just can't do for themselves.
The United States will do its part, but the circumstances on the ground require more from all of you. I ask each country to examine how it can best support these vital stabilization efforts, especially in regard to contribution of military and financial resources.
This is just how the world works. Trump tends to think of diplomacy as some sort of weakness, as code for being soft or giving stuff away for free. But the reality is, it goes the other way. It's about getting countries to do stuff for us. And in the battle against ISIS, they're the ones who are on the front lines. On the ground, it's the Iraqis who are doing most of the heavy lifting in the fight against the Islamic State. Turks, they're key for stopping weapons and money from flowing in and out of the territory controlled by ISIS. And if Trump is serious about preventing refugees from flowing into Europe and the United States, he's going to have to count on countries like Jordan and Lebanon, where most of the refugees are going first. Trump's asked his generals to give him a new strategy for the war against ISIS. But if you listen carefully, they've been talking about this sort of multifaceted approach since pretty much the beginning. Just this month, one of his top commanders told Congress, you can kill as many terrorists you want, you can take away as much territory as you want, but you're not going to shoot your way to victory.
The Congressional Black Caucus has about 50 members who mostly hail from districts that definitely did not vote for Donald Trump. But today, they're meeting a president who didn't quite seem to know who they were when he awkwardly asked a black reporter in a press conference last month to set up a meeting for him.
Are you gonna include the CBC, Mr. President, in your conversations with your urban agenda, your inner city agenda, as well as?
Am I going to include?
Are you going to include the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional?
Well,
Hispanic
I would.
Caucus,
I tell you what. Do you want to set up the meeting? Do you want to set up the meeting?
No.
Are they friends of yours?
Just a reporter.
No, set up the meeting.
I know some of them.
The danger? The meeting turning into a photo op. Kind of like what happened to a group of presidents from historically black colleges and universities last month. Black people surrounding Donald Trump in photos without a lot of substantive conversation to go with it. Representative Gwen Moore is one of these members headed over to the White House today to meet with the president. She says she has constituents that don't want a meeting like this to happen, but she thinks that maybe there's some small things she can work with this president on.
We have a huge binder that we're going to submit and leave with the president in the White House. But what occurs to me right now is to provide summer jobs for youth. He talked about the conditions of the inner cities and the crime and so on. It's proven to lower crime, to provide economic support to distressed communities and parents.
What's the give and take? Because right now, it could be seen that he is looking for a photo opportunity with the Congressional Black Caucus. Is that what you are willing to give?
Well, I think that, standing up and posing for a picture is one thing, but we are there to work. We only have 30 minutes, as I understand it, with the president. We don't want to spend 15 minutes of that time lining up for the picture. We want to get right to our agenda.
Do you think he owes the black community an apology?
Many of our constituents are extremely offended, particularly particularly about what he has said about President Obama committing a felony, and also characterizing our communities as nothing but places where you get shot down and killed. I would hope that he would treat us with the kind of respect that we intend to treat him with.
Is there a world where you would say, no, I'm not coming to the White House?
I mean, when you start talking about eliminating emergency food and shelter benefits, I can't not go.
President Trump has ordered the Department of Homeland Security to hire 5,000 new U.S. Border Patrol agents, expanding the force by 25%, even as the number of people caught illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border has hit a 4-decade low. But Customs and Border Protection, which includes the Border Patrol, is already by far the largest law enforcement agency in America, with more armed agents than the FBI, DEA, Secret Service, and U.S. Marshals combined. And finding thousands more local people who can do the difficult job and pass a background check won't be easy.
How often do you go out on patrol?
At least once a week. I go out 10 hours. And it's in the very area that I'm taking you to.
When we asked Art Del Cueto, vice president of the Border Patrol Union, to tell us why the patrol needs 5,000 new agents, he offered to show us instead. Del Cueto says that hiring more agents is the only thing that will secure sections of the border like this one, which can only be reached on foot.
This is the border. This is what's protecting the United States. So I can just hold it. People can come in all day.
It isn't quite that easy. The desert sun here is brutal, and migrants, once they cross the line, can get lost and wander for days. Many die trying to get to safety, and there are agents hunting for them, even if they're rare. The area we visited was littered with tools smuggling networks use to avoid detection, including water jugs made of black plastic so as not to catch the sunlight, and shoes with carpet soles made to leave no footprints. Del Cueto is in favor of a border wall, and he says agents need better communications technology. But, he says, none of these things will make a difference without more people. And how often do you have agents in this area at all?
Not very often, because we don't have the manpower to send them out here.
When Donald Trump came on the scene, Del Cueto saw an opportunity. Last year, he pushed the National Border Patrol Council to endorse Trump, the first time the union ever backed a candidate before the general election. That's Del Cueto shaking Trump's hand during a meeting in New York. Trump, he says, was the only candidate who asked the union what the patrol needed. Trump's executive order calling for more agents is a sign he was listening. The Border Patrol used to be a small force spread out over the southwestern border. It grew during the 90s, then exploded in the years after 9/11, more than doubling in the span of a few years. With growth came problems. Between 2006 and 2011, complaints against border agents nearly doubled, according to CBP's own numbers, including allegations of excessive force and corruption. Some agents were discovered to be on the payroll of Mexican cartels, which used them to smuggle drugs and contraband into the US. In response, Congress passed a law in 2010 that instituted regular background checks and a polygraph test for all new applicants, which more than 2/3 of candidates fail. That law was based in part on the work of Jim Wong, the former second-in-command at CBP's Internal Affairs Unit, who helped introduce the polygraph exam that Congress later mandated. Wong investigated misconduct in the Border Patrol for 10 years before retiring in 2011 to Louisiana. He says the agency hired too many people too quickly in the mid-2000s.
What that allows is a person who shouldn't be on the job to come in through the door. You're going to give them a badge and a gun and the authority to detain people, make life and death decisions, and they're going to be on the job for a long time.
Can you give me an example of the kinds of corruption problems that originated as a result of the hiring surge?
We had an applicant that was hired pre-polygraph. And we found out after he'd been hired that he was actually a convicted drug dealer in Mexico because he did not have a U.S. record and they did a cursory background check. That fact never came up.
CBP told us it's confident it can hire 5,000 new employees without lowering standards. Del Cueto and the union agree, though they also say the way the polygraph is administered is too exacting and excludes viable candidates. They also say the problems of the past were overstated, since agents arrested for corruption never amounted to more than 1% of the workforce.
Will there be, bad apples that come through? There's always the possibility. That doesn't prevent you from doing it.
So that's essentially a cost of growing the patrol in the way that it needs to be grown.
Yeah, it's a cost of growing. It's a price that we're going to end up having to pay. You can't put a price on a human life. You cannot put a price on security. You do what needs to be done, you ask what needs to be put out here, and you do everything necessary to make sure this border is secure.
To commemorate the 400th anniversary of William Shakespeare's death, the Royal Shakespeare Company unveiled a wildly innovative staging of The Tempest. In it, the shape-shifting sprite Ariel is enhanced through the use of live motion capture, a technology never before brought to the stage.
Let thee out.
The character of Ariel just lends himself to so much transformation and so much magical wonder that we looked at how we could create a digital character. Motion capture allowed us to look at the character of Ariel through 21st century puppetry.
I've been really lucky, actually.
Yeah. Mark Courtley plays Ariel and spends most of his show days at least partially in costume.
So at one point during rehearsals, you had like 25 cameras like all up in your grill. How do you actually still be an actor in that moment without getting distracted?
They told me very early on that we see you as data. So you have to lose any vanity. A lot of the motion capture work is just getting the muscular movements as precise as possible.
The tech is ambitious, using a PC with 50 million times more memory than the one that put man on the moon. But this kind of live rendering is clearly in its rudimentary stages. The facial motion capture for when Ariel speaks is ungainly, and the animations aren't always precise. But this kind of intrepidness is in keeping with Shakespeare's sense of experimentation. The trickiest aspect is that the avatar isn't pre-recorded. It's performed and projected live.
Do you feel like all this added text sort of detracts from your performance?
I feel quite passionately that it just enhances the stuff because, as I say, it gives Ariel the ability to do things that I physically can't do. And also, we've been very careful not to just use the tech for its own sake. Ariel has to turn into a harpy, which is like half woman, half bird-like evil creature. And of course, we can do that with the technology that has been afforded us. I had to learn about using wings, I suppose, which are rendered by my arm movements. And certain bits of my arm have more control, so my wrist movement controls a large section of the wing.
Collaborating with Intel and mocap experts, the Imaginarium Studios, they started out with ping pong balls to create a shape-shifting Ariel, but evolved to a costume with 17 small flat sensors controlling 336 joints from 27 projectors scattered throughout the theater.
They had old tricks like disappearing tables, and I think I read somewhere that a couple of polar bears brought on a chariot for, which would have been extraordinary. Can you imagine if you're just sitting in a theatre in the 1600s and you see two polar bears come on stage?
No, that's definitely
amazing.
Next level. Yeah. This is really future.
So I think we're really in the spirit of what Shakespeare wanted, and I think he'd be pretty thrilled to see this kind of work being done.
Do you feel really comfortable speaking for Shakespeare at this point in your career?
Because I'm stood in Stratford-upon-Avon right now, where Shakespeare was born and died, I feel like I am his spokesman right now.
That's Vice News Tonight for Wednesday, March 22nd.